So a few months back, I decided to watch through all of the live-action Resident Evil movies and talk about them in a single video. That was an experience. But alongside that, and playing through a lot of the mainline games, I thought it would only be fair if I went and watched all of the animated Resident Evil movies as well, especially being told that they're way better than the live-action versions, and they're actually within continuity of the game. So I thought this would be an interesting thing to check out, and I went through and watched them in order as I played through the game series. So this is going to be a compilation video of all of my reviews of the animated Resident Evil films. I did review them all one by one on the channel in individual videos, so technically this video is nothing new if you've been here for a while, but if you haven't, or if you want to go back and talk about these films again with me, I'm going to review all the films in order for you now, so consider this to be a definitive opinion video on my experience of the animated Resident Evil movies.
Shoot them in the head.
I am brought to the 2008 CG animated film Resident Evil Degeneration. In all honesty, I was excited to get to these movies, especially after watching all the live action stuff, and now that I'm a bigger fan of a lot of these characters, I figured it would be nice to sit back and watch a story with them play out instead of frantically fighting for my life during the process like you do in the games. It could be an interesting and fun change of pace. And starting the movie off, I actually really like the exposition that's given in the opening scene. We get a lot of various montages of news reports and a good sense of what's happened since the Raccoon City incident. It recaps that, and then it also moves forward in the timeline, showing us that Umbrella has gone under as a company. People are now generally aware of the existence of bioweapons, even with all of the cover-ups and lack of evidence to confirm it. Several strange incidents continue to happen, and the people are no longer idly standing by, and they are demanding answers and evidence for the horrors that others have faced. And since the fall of Umbrella, various strains of the virus have gotten out into the world, some being sold on the black market, basically causing situations where if somebody has enough money and resources, then they could get their hands on such dangerous items like the G and T virus. I like the dark reality that the fall of Umbrella actually might have caused a worse outcome for the world, because now these things are just out there, up for grabs for anybody that has the right power to access them. And I also like this continuing theme of these mega corporations all acquiring what they can of it in order to cause situations to make themselves look better in the public eye. Although Umbrella is iconic, all of these various companies really remind me of the same identity, and that's why I think Resident Evil presents the companies more of an idea rather than showing us a specific villain as a CEO or something like that. It's this idea that companies and corporations believe they can contain and control such dangerous artifacts while constantly being able to shift the blame onto other people and keep themselves out of the spotlight. It also brings back reminders of the Weyland-Yutani company from the Alien franchise. I feel like they have a lot in common. This movie is kind of structured like what one of the games would be, having big set-piece locations where the majority of the action happens. The first being an airport where we meet up with Claire Redfield as a T-virus zombie outbreak begins to take place. And I really love that it's the traditional Resident Evil T-virus zombies here, because that's always been my favorite element. I do like that the story expands and gives us more variety of different types of infections, but there's something about the classic zombie that can never go wrong in my opinion. And essentially, without question, the movie is trying to mimic the vibes of Resident Evil 2, because soon after, when the airport becomes quarantined, they send in Leon Kennedy to help deal with the situation, culminating in the reuniting of Leon and Claire, which are the two main characters from Resident Evil 2. And we watch them battle zombies and protect civilians, while escorting a grimy asshole senator out of the area as well. It was just great to see these two together again, and as far as just traditional zombie movie vibes go, I really like this opening airport segment a lot, and I wish it lasted a bit longer. There's several good set pieces and moments that really throw you into that zombie movie experience. Leon leading the charge, being experienced in this, as well as Claire herself, and with the CGI animation, there's plenty of times where it stops to give us moments like this. Leon is even using the same signature gun that he used in Resident Evil 4, although no conversations come up about any of his experiences in Spain. But the airport outbreak is just to get the ball rolling. When a pharmaceutical company named Will Pharma rolls in with a vaccine to save the day, things already become very suspicious. And then a terrorist group threatens another T-virus outbreak unless all of the truth is revealed to the public, blowing up the vaccines. So there's conspiracies going on, uncertainty whether to trust those in power, and a family dynamic between a new character introduced, Angela, working to help Leon. They also kind of have a potentially romantic subplot, which I don't like, especially since Claire is right there, but we'll move past that. Because it's Angela's brother Curtis that is the one looking to expose Will Pharma and commit acts of terror to do so. The cast separates as Leon helps Angela, and Claire heads to the Will Pharma lab with its head researcher, Frederick Downing, to discover some shocking revelations about the company's access to the viruses and their research on the vaccines. The latter half of the film takes place at this facility, and it's attacked by Curtis, who gets injected with the G virus, transforming into some kind of genetic abomination. Which the transformed Curtis fight against the military was really fun to watch, and I don't know where Curtis ranks in the power scaling of Resident Evil creatures, but he seemed ridiculously strong as he was depicted here. There is kind of a silly moment where he sees a picture of his family and is temporarily reminded of his humanity, and I often wonder how these mutations work when it comes to things like that. Like, I do remember that Birkin was at least aware of his daughter for a while, but he was constantly mutating throughout the course of RE2. So I'm just assuming the longer the virus is within you, the more it depletes your sense of self and your original consciousness. But some people can hold that at bay for longer than others. At least that's what I think. Anybody that's an expert in Resident Evil lore, let me know down below. But we learn that the mastermind behind the outbreak was Downing himself, who was a former Umbrella employee, now using Curtis as his scapegoat to cover his tracks and selling the viruses and vaccines while he tries to fake his own death. But Leon and Claire catch him in the end with a tease of a new company, Tricell, that has bought Will Pharma out, as well as assassinating the senator and erasing all information that he knows, which I believe is helping to set up the events that happen in Resident Evil 5. But I do have some major negatives here, trying to give the film the benefit of the doubt when it comes to the animation. I know it came out in 2008, and it's important to keep that in mind, but CG animation just wasn't quite up to par back then as it is now, and I wouldn't say that it looks bad per se. I think a lot of it looks fine. It's just that the characters are generally very stiff and awkward in their movements, with the exception of very specific action sequences where you can tell where more time and money was spent putting into it. But ultimately, yes, it does feel and look like a video game cutscene that just goes on for 90 minutes. It's like you're watching compilations of a story from a video game, but you never get a chance to play it for yourself. So although I was excited for that change of pace, it did feel kind of odd watching all of these scenes play out and then never having it cut back to the game. Also, Leon feels very wooden here, and I don't know how much of this is just the vocal performance from the English dub, and I get that the situation he's in is serious, but he seems very stoic and matter-of-fact here. He doesn't really feel the same as he was in Resident Evil 4, which was supposed to have happened right before this movie takes place. Maybe dealing with Ashley from RE4 long enough put him over the edge, I don't know, but something about Leon felt off here. Claire, on the other hand, feels just like I would imagine her to after Resident Evil 2. She really holds up, and she does have the same voice actress from the original RE2, and everything about her in the movie I enjoyed. It was only Leon that felt off to me. But the majority of the film focuses heavily on the action, with some horror elements infused too. There's nothing too over the top or gory here. And considering the structure of the film, if this were a video game, it feels like it would fit in very well with the Revelations series, considering Revelations 1 dealt with the same kind of scenario of uncovering a mystery of another outbreak after corrupt people in power got their hands on some bioweapons. The final battle between Leon and the Curtis Tyrant is admittedly a lot of fun, and here is where I thought the animation was at its best. They saved it for the very end. And as I was watching this, I kept thinking to myself, this is the kind of movie that I would have loved when I was 15. And I do mean that as a compliment. It reminds me of something I would have rented from the video store, like an anime film or a more adult-oriented action kind of movie in my youth, and even if they weren't the best produced or the best acted, if they gave me some compelling and fun action scenes, I would ride that hype for as long as I could. If I had seen this back when I was younger, I'd be watching it over and over again probably every night for a while. Where I'm at now, I liked it just fine, and I think it's better than most of the live-action offerings at any case. You get an extra side story with Leon and Claire, some more world building about the spread of bioweapons, and the world becoming more aware of it. And a lot of action scenes that are absolutely video game cutscenes, but fun nonetheless. I also noticed some recognizable actors in the English dub, such as Laura Bailey and even Steve Bloom showing up to voice a soldier named Greg. The attempt to make a CG Resident Evil movie and have it take place in the same continuity of the games was an ambitious and probably daunting endeavor, but I don't think any harm really came from it. It offers some alternatives from having to sit through any of the live action stuff, and for their first attempt at it, I'd say it's not bad. My expectations were not too high, but I also wasn't disappointed. It's somewhere right in the middle. Resident Evil Damnation is the second Resident Evil animated movie released originally in 2012, and it takes place in between Resident Evil 5 and 6, the games, in the timeline. Mostly the same team that worked on Degeneration is here as well, but with only a couple years difference in release, I do have to say that the animation quality has vastly improved. Whereas Degeneration had characters looking kinda awkward and very stiff at times, this one was pretty impressive in its motion capture, and though it's still basically like watching a 90-minute cutscene, I really did enjoy the way that it looked, the action sequences, the choreography of the battles. It's all much better this time around. Even though there are some instances where it still looks kind of weird, I think for the most part, this is a definite improvement. However, when it comes to the storyline, I actually have to say that I like Degeneration a lot better. Not to say the story here was bad, but I did find myself very disinterested in a lot of it, and it really does feel like it's kind of a forced extra story just to have an extra Leon Kennedy adventure, but it doesn't ultimately amount to too much in the Resident Evil lore. Basically, there is a civil war that is happening in a fictional country near Russia, with a side of it gaining access to bioweapons and using them within the war itself. Something bound to happen once some of these BOWs began to get spread out in the world and entered into the black market. Anybody rich and powerful enough to get their hands on it will probably ultimately end up using it. And all that stuff was talked about in Degeneration as well as the first Revelations game, so it's not really anything new here, but it is interesting to see them being used in the midst of an actual war. Mostly what's in use is a strain of the Plagas, along with a lot of liquors. And the liquors here look great. There's a ton of them in the movie. They do a lot of stuff with them. They're involved in a lot of the action sequences. And they also introduce this extra element that I'm kind of torn on whether or not I like it or not, where a certain infected person with the Plagas is able to basically control the liquors and give them commands, kind of like a trained dog. In a way, I don't like it because I feel like what makes the liquors so scary to begin with is their animalistic tendencies and the fact that they're so fast, strong, and unpredictable. So controlling them kind of feels like it takes away a little bit of the fear factor of them. I'd rather see them just be monsters instead of tools used by somebody that can actually have coherent thoughts. But on the other hand, the imagery of somebody controlling a pack of them and sending all of them full force to attack at once and even having them battle a tyrant in the final act is admittedly very visually cool to see. I also imagine someone like this as a boss in one of the games would be far more interesting than doing it in an animated movie. Like, imagine you had to fight somebody that was controlling the liquors while at the same time dodging and battling several liquors at once. It would make for a pretty great boss fight. Anyway, Leon is our main character here once again, dropped into the middle of the war to investigate, but then he's told to leave as soon as he gets there. and he tells them, nah, I'm gonna stay here and see it through. So basically he's here alone without any support or backup. And I'm happy to say that unlike Degeneration, Leon's personality is much more intact here. He gives a lot of funny quips from time to time, he's doing his spin kicks, and he's trying and failing many times to explain to the people around him the dangers of these BOWs, but oftentimes the explanation is just too little too late. The only other character from the games that appears in this movie is Ada Wong. And I don't know if it's just me, but I found her design in this movie to feel really off for some reason. I don't know why, but to me this doesn't really look like Ada, even though it is. But she's here for other purposes, of course, pretending to be a member of the BSSA, but actually she's here to steal a sample of the Plagas. Or who she's stealing it for at this time, I'm still not sure, because I think this leads into Resident Evil 6, which I have not played yet, so hopefully I'll find out in the future, or if not, it's just a story element of the movie that might go nowhere. I just know she's definitely not getting it for Wesker, because he is currently melted in a volcano somewhere. But anyways, what I'm noticing is that these movies tend to placate to a standard trope of the Resident Evil series, for better or for worse. What I mean is that I'm realizing that they can't really change the status quo in any way, shape, or form, because they can't contradict anything that would happen in an upcoming game. But as a result, it seems to just recreate game moments and not have a chance to build upon anything beyond just references of things that we've already seen. What I'm talking about is, for example, Leon and Ada have pretty much the exact same kind of interactions that they have in Resident Evil 4. They have a little skirmish, there's some flirting, and then Ada has her own agenda, but is also subtly helping Leon from a distance, as Leon looks at her, rolls his eyes, and just says, "Women." And look, I love it in Resident Evil 4, but it's just the same thing redone here for this movie. Maybe it's meant to be fan service, but since it's not really giving us anything extra, you could just have the interaction in RE4 and not miss anything by not seeing this one. There's also several new characters added to flesh out the story, none of which that I cared too much about, but I did think that the Slav Republic leader, Svetlana, was the most interesting because she's introduced as a typical political leader that lets others do the dirty work for her, but then she ends up having a hand-to-hand fight with Ada Wong and holds her own. We learn that she has a lot of combat training, and she's also shown to have a bunch of scars on her back, and I wasn't sure if this was due to her training or if this was some kind of infection making her stronger that's not talked about. There isn't really a lot of payoff with her, though, because she just kind of fades into the distance by the end of the movie, assuming that she's taken out of power once the US forces move back in, so I don't really know her full backstory. There's also two rebels that team up with Leon, JD and Buddy, neither of which I liked very much, but Buddy has a legitimate, understandable reason for his fighting, where a school that he taught at along with his girlfriend was destroyed by the opposing side. He eventually gains access to the Plaga strain that allows you to control lickers, and then he sends them to attack Svetlana's lab, but still doesn't quite get his vengeance. The coolest part of the movie to me is the final act where Svetlana unleashes some tyrants, which all look like Mr. X, probably giving Leon some terrible flashbacks. To me, they also all kind of look like the engineers from Prometheus, so I appreciated that, but they are presented very much like the Incredible Hulk. I know that's a lot of references all at once, but basically what I'm saying is that these tyrants are really damn strong, and they knock Leon around a bunch, which also made me realize that Leon's back should probably be at a point where he shouldn't be able to walk, and he also never really seems to bleed as much as he's thrown around. I get that he's a strong boy, but damn is he resilient. And you also do get to see a bunch of lickers controlled by Buddy, all battling the tyrant, and it's very awesome imagery to see. They also use a tank at one point, which barely works, but they do manage to take one down. It's all really fun action stuff, and animation-wise, it looks great for the time that it came out. But overall, I think the movie is just kind of okay, which seems to be the running theme for me when it comes to this animated Resident Evil stuff. I really do hope that I like the next ones much more, and I am finding them visually fun to watch, but just story-wise, they're nothing special. I also realize that this is during the era of Resident Evil, where it was focusing a lot more on being an action-based series, along with dealing with government conspiracies, politics, and the military aspects, and though I don't dislike those, I don't gravitate to that aspect of the series as much as I gravitate towards the horror elements like creepy mansions, strange cults, and zombie-ridden cities. That's more my style of Resident Evil. But for what it is, it's not a bad time to watch. I had some fun with it, good animation, Leon has some fun one-liners, and I really did like the final tyrant fights. Okay, so I have reached the third Resident Evil animated film called Vendetta. And this one came out in 2017, though it takes place in 2014. But I think the time that it came out really shows how technology has caught up to the point where the animation of these films begins to look really damn good. Other than a few times where I thought the faces were a little bit off and wonky, mostly just with Chris, so maybe it's just a Chris face problem. But the fluidity of the characters' movements, the action sequences, the locations that we visit, all of it worked for me and got me more immersed into the experience than any of the other animated movies have so far. And also, this one basically comes down to being a buddy team-up movie with Chris Redfield and Leon Kennedy taking down hordes of infected using the most ridiculous and over-the-top action movie ways to do it. I mean, come on, we have the two most badass leading boys of the Resident Evil series interacting more than they ever have before and kicking non-stop waves of zombie ass. This is just a balls-to-the-wall, unapologetic action movie, and I couldn't have had a better time with it. So far, it's probably my favorite animated Resident Evil film. Similar to the previous animated movies, it does play on references and callbacks to the games, like in the beginning where Chris and a team of BSSA members investigate a mansion, and yes, this mansion has zombies in it. The opening scene is the closest we get to anything horror related, but you know what? I think everything here was very well done. It has good tension and build up. Some of the soldiers even get killed by traps in the mansion as opposed to just the zombies, and it gives you some of that classic horror movie throwback RE vibes that people have been longing for. Sure, it's quick and a lot of it's the same old shit you've seen before, but it's done well enough that I enjoyed it. Also, Chris has really got to keep himself out of mansions at this point. It's getting ridiculous. The villain in the film is actually somewhat interesting as well. He's an arms dealer named Arius who was targeted by the government that bombed him during his wedding and killed his bride-to-be. He did survive, but surely enough, now he has the massive incentive, or should I say, vendetta, against the government to try to get revenge, and after getting his hands on some bioweapons, he intends to do just that. But at the same time, his sanity is also declining as he keeps a severed arm of his fiancée with the wedding ring still on it, and even mimics a mock wedding scenario, and after abducting Rebecca Chambers, he puts her in a wedding dress because she reminds him of his wife. And yes, he does want to put the ring on her. So yeah, I kind of like his demented and warped mind mixing with his ambition for revenge. After the last few Resident Evil movies having a handful of just corrupt government officials being the villains, I kind of liked having one that had a more twisted mind where you didn't know what he was going to do next, and the guy can also hold his own against Chris Redfield in a fight. He was pretty unique. And yeah, as I mentioned, Rebecca Chambers is in this movie too, the first time we get to see her since Resident Evil 0, and I'm happy to inform that she still is a cutie patootie. Now she's working as a scientist developing vaccines for the viruses, which I do kind of like because she started out as more of the medic on the STARS team. So since this movie would take place in 2014, about 16 years after the initial outbreak and the mansion event, it kind of makes sense to me that she would have had the time to progress her skills and eventually go in this direction. And unlike somebody like Chris, probably would not want to be on the front lines anymore after what she experienced. Part of the difference of the zombie outbreaks in this movie, this virus called the A virus, it's a type of infection where the zombies are actually able to take commands and go after specific targets, which is kind of funny because traditionally, before the George Romero style zombie movies existed that changed the definition of what a zombie was, zombies were more associated with voodoo and were essentially controllable slaves that you could send after somebody to attack them. So hey, it's come full circle. But they use that super thin plot detail of them taking commands to think maybe it has something to do with the Plagas from Resident Evil 4 that Leon fought. So Rebecca and Chris go to see Leon. It's a pretty contrived way to get him into the movie, but it doesn't matter. The story of this movie is not the appeal, it's getting to see this unique character team up and witness a ton of action spectacle. But also, we need to talk about this. On the ride to go see Leon, the characters mention the TV series Breaking Bad.
DC and Damien aren't talking about Breaking Bad for once.
Hey, don't go there, Chris.
Yo, that shit's ahead of its time.
It's a goddamn masterpiece.
Which, at first I thought, awesome, Breaking Bad reference, one of the greatest shows of all time. Breaking Bad is a canon TV series in Resident Evil. But then I remembered this scene.
No, man. Resident Evil 4 takes it by a long shot.
Please, brother, you front.
No, man, seriously.
It's a moment in Breaking Bad where Badger and Skinny Pete are talking about Resident Evil 4. So wait, Breaking Bad is canon in Resident Evil, and then Resident Evil is also canon in Breaking Bad? I might have to bust out the whiteboard for this one because this multiverse is about to implode in on itself. Anyway, Leon is basically acting how Chris did in Resident Evil 6, drinking his sorrows away. I guess a decade plus of fighting monsters will do that to all of these characters eventually. And I do like how after Leon and Chris can't seem to get along, Rebecca basically plays the role of the therapist to calm them down. But once they're attacked, Rebecca is captured, and then the two of them decide to team up to get her back and to take down Arius. Another interesting thing about this movie is that they use New York City as a location for the next outbreak. Sure, plenty of real cities and locations exist in Resident Evil, but they usually use fictional towns and cities for the outbreak scenes. So it's a cool change of pace to have this take place in New York City. Not that we spend a lot of time there, but you do get to see Leon riding a motorcycle through the streets, shooting the Cerebrus dogs, while somehow driving the motorcycle with his feet and using his hands for some gun fu, driving around blowing up tankers that contain the gas that jumpstarts the outbreak, and Leon seems to be able to ride this motorcycle anywhere he wants to in the entire film, whether it's upstairs, inside buildings, through corridors, or on rooftops. The motorcycle is basically an extension of his spin kicks. The main highlight of the movie, though, is definitely when Chris and Leon raid Arius' hideout and have a full-on hallway fight scene with a bunch of zombies. Sure, it's a bit dumb, but seeing these two characters back-to-back just annihilating a bunch of enemies with some John Wick-level choreography just made me feel like I immediately wanted to go to the gym and max out on every single exercise. It pumped me up. It is pure adrenalized testosterone that will make any action movie fan cream his shorts. And what I'm really trying to say is the scene is pretty cool, and I liked it. And that's the main appeal of Vendetta. It's a solid action movie that doesn't try to be anything else, and even though the virus strain is something a little bit different here, it doesn't really add too many extra elements to the lore. It's pretty much here to give us a Chris and Leon team-up movie and some great fan service, and in that, it succeeds. Arius is also a pretty good villain. Like I said, he can throw down, even giving Chris a run for his money. There's a great knife versus gun battle between the two of them that feels like something out of Equilibrium. Shout out to the 10 people that know what that movie is. But of course, in traditional Resident Evil movie fashion, we do have to end with a giant tyrant fight, and I'm still kind of confused on what happened because Arius transforms by merging himself with another character or something. I don't know, I guess it doesn't really matter, but the final rooftop battle of Chris and Leon versus the mutated Arius is also extremely satisfying with tons of spectacle. There's not even really a lot to comment on, just go watch it. It's old-fashioned action movie nonsense in the best possible way. Now, I get that this could be a disappointment for some people because other than the opening mansion scene, which I do think does a good job being a classic Resident Evil throwback moment, there's not really any horror to be found in this movie other than the fact that zombies exist. It makes sense that this would come out and take place shortly after Resident Evil 6 because the tone is very similar, but I get that this isn't what a lot of Resident Evil fans may have wanted at the time. Trust me, I would love to see a slow, atmospheric, and creepy animated Resident Evil movie. Hell, even do a movie in first person like RE7 is. But going through the franchise for the first time and waiting so long to see my boys side by side kicking ass together, it was a bit cathartic to see this team up, and that was enough for me. Also, Rebecca gets a lot of time to shine, and I haven't seen her in a while, and she's still a cutie patootie. Oh yes, and the ending makes an emphasis on one of Arias's henchmen, Maria, still alive at the end of the film, and although I do believe I've heard she comes back in the next animated movie, I initially thought maybe this is another one of those cliffhangers like at the end of Revelations 2 that goes nowhere, but I think I will see her again in the next one. Although in this movie, she didn't really leave any kind of impression on me, she just felt like she was kind of there, so hopefully she does a little bit more.
You watch it spread.
Terrifying.
Resident Evil Infinite Darkness is another one of the CGI animated stories that takes place in the same continuity of the games. And even though this was released in 2021, it takes place in the year 2006, fitting in right between Resident Evil 4 and 5 in the continuity and after the Degeneration movie. This is actually a 4-episode series on Netflix, and I will say 2 things about that. First, between the only 2 Resident Evil shows on Netflix, please, for the love of God, watch this one and not the live-action abomination. It'll save you valuable parts of your sanity. And it's also incredibly hilarious how different both of these shows really are. But the second comment I have is, I don't really see the point of releasing this as a series. I mean, with only 4 episodes that average about 25 minutes apiece, they could have easily put this all together and just made it a movie instead. And considering all the other CG Resident Evil outputs are movies, I find it kind of odd that they decided to go with the episodic approach to this. And I watched all 4 episodes back to back like a movie anyway, so whatever the case, let's just talk about it. Since I watched Degeneration before this, which was released in the year 2008, the first major factor I noticed watching Infinite Darkness is just how much better the animation was. That 13-year difference really shows itself, and the characters move and flow way more fluid and realistic here, and it definitely has a consistency in the feeling and tone of the newer Resident Evil remake games, which I'm a huge fan of. They once again focus on Leon and Claire as the main characters, though this one is much more of a Leon story, where Claire is only kind of there in a B-plot filling in the gaps. Another thing I appreciated is that unlike Degeneration, Leon actually seems to have personality here. Thank you. He has way more dialogue, he comments on plenty of the events from the past, and he has a couple of fun, snarky comments and lines along the way, showcasing his annoyance when facing down particular enemies.
You gotta be shitting me. Wish I had some cheese.
Once again making it feel very much in line with the Leon that we see in the Resident Evil 2 and 4 remake games. Claire also feels mostly consistent, and I think at this point they wouldn't dare put Claire in anything without having her wear some kind of red jacket, which is kind of funny. But she is definitely pushed way more into the background, having a B-plot uncovering conspiracies that occasionally link up with Leon's story, so they do cross over, just not really as much as you would expect them to. A lot of the first episode takes place in the White House. Ashley is not here, but we do get to see her father, the president, and he gives several callbacks to events made in RE4 with Leon going to rescue Ashley, so I like that little continuity consistency. Leon is called in to help a task force on a mission, while at the same time the White House begins to get overrun with infected zombies. You may think a zombie outbreak is cliche at this point, but for me, I love this shit. Give me more zombies. Also, Leon is basically John Wick at this point for taking them out, and I'm here for that too. But the crux of the story revolves around an incident that took place in a fictional Middle East country, Panamstan, where a military group was shot down and exposed to biological weapons. The lone survivor, Jason, who has been hailed as this hero, which whenever spoken to him directly makes him feel very uncomfortable. And I like that the interactions between Jason and Leon, both of them have a moment where they share stories about horrific events that have happened to them in the past, but with both of them leaving out very vital parts of information. But Jason, along with another member of the team named Shen Mei, have teamed up to expose the events of that day, and by any means necessary. And the mystery of what happened and who's behind it all slowly begins to unfold through the course of the 4 episodes, with Leon caught in the crossfire many times, not realizing that 2 of his teammates have ulterior motives, and Claire is elsewhere putting the puzzle pieces together herself. It does feel very repetitive at this point, since it's basically a similar story yet again as Revelations 1 and Degenerations were. Now with Infinite Darkness, there's another high-ranking government official behind all of the madness, and it continues to play out like a political thriller of sorts with some action scenes thrown in to keep the pacing on track. Basically, Jason's rescue team was exposed to an outbreak while on their mission as they attempted to save Shenmei's brother. Once infected with the virus, Wilson, our resident military antagonist obsessed with power, used the leverage of having an inhibitor to the virus to make Jason's team carry out missions that would assist in his goals and rise to power. They had to inject themselves with an inhibitor every so often, or else they would begin to transform and mutate, and only Wilson could supply this inhibitor to them. So the entire time, Wilson has been gaining closer access to the president to help influence his decisions. Oh, and while also secretly having an underground laboratory filled with bioweapons, making an army of human super soldiers. Yeah, this guy's been putting in a lot of work. Leon learns all of this from Shenmei herself right before what's left of her brother and her grandfather are killed, and Claire figures it out all on her own, out during her own little subplot, and then is promptly captured by Wilson's men. Which is really just an excuse to get her and Leon in the same place for the final episode, because otherwise there'd be no real reason for them to interact. Once we reach that point, pretty much the entire final episode takes place in this underground lab, and I'm noticing more and more trends of Resident Evil as I go through it, where the final act needs to happen in a laboratory location, preferably underground, and then someone will inevitably transform into a massive Hulk-like bioweapon for the final battle. In this case, it's Jason, and I still was thrown off at him being very coherent and able to speak in his transformed state. I don't know, I think it looks really cool, but it really does take away from the body horror aspect if you still retain your consciousness post-transformation. I know I've kind of seen similar effects here and there, like Krauser in RE4, so it's not unheard of or anything, but I think I just prefer the horror aspects of your autonomy being taken away from you as you mutate and transform into something monstrous, a tragic point of no return. In any case, the animation and action sequences here are great, and a huge step up from the last animated Resident Evil movie that I watched. Shenmei doesn't make it, and Jason's goal remains the same here, as he plans to expose what Wilson did to the world, even if the lab itself is destroyed in the process. There is an element of sympathy here for his character, as Jason didn't really ask for anything that happened to him and originally was trying to do the right thing, so you do want to see him get some kind of resolution for his suffering, even if he is going about it in a destructive way. And at least in this moment, I also felt for Leon, because though agreeing with the sentiment, you can't allow a creature like this to reach the surface, so it's a no-win scenario. Because I'm assuming Jason's rage would probably take that out on other people, or perhaps he'd continue to mutate and things would just get worse and worse. But as far as exposing the secrets to the world, I mean, yeah, I'm kind of with him on that. Which leads me to the ending of the series, which I gotta admit, I really don't fully understand the point of this ending. So I would love somebody to explain it to me in the comments that's more well-versed in Resident Evil lore. They have a chip from Shenmei's brother with data on it that could expose what they were doing in Panamstan, and Claire wants to use it for obvious reasons, to show the world what these corrupt military leaders were doing. But Leon refuses to give it to her. I don't know if this is implying that Leon has some kind of secret plan to end BOW testing from inside the system, or if it's meant to imply a much darker outcome in which Leon has been working way too close with authority for so long now that he himself doesn't want the truth to be exposed. Refusing to give the chip over to Claire has got me really suspicious into his motives. It also causes a rift in their dynamic because she seems to walk away no longer trusting him. It's obviously kept vague, but it feels like a plot point that will be left in the dust because even though in the timeline this is before RE5, this came out only a few years ago, so unless any of this is in the remaining CG movies or RE6, I doubt that it's going to matter at all, but that's just the thing. If this doesn't have a lasting impact or matter, why have it be a plot point at the end of the series? Why make things so awkward between Leon and Claire if this goes nowhere? I don't know. I'm a bit lost on this, so if anyone wants to clear things up for me in the comments, I would appreciate it. I could be interested in an angle where Leon is beginning to get a little bit more corrupted, but at the same time, I just don't think it fits who he is. So I'd be more likely to go with the theory that he's planning something himself, but I don't know where to go with it. As far as Infinite Darkness goes as a whole, I'm a bit conflicted on it because on the one hand, I think the presentation is fantastic. People say that I hate CGI, but that's not exactly true. I just hate shitty CGI. I think this looks great, and I could totally watch an entire series with this style. I love the action scenes, the White House zombie attack, and how the plot slowly unravels over the course of its runtime instead of giving all the exposition at once. I like that Leon, except for the final 5 minutes, feels like the Leon I know from the games. And Jason is a perfectly good, tragic antagonist doing bad things for the right reasons. There's plenty of spectacle that's scattered throughout, and I watched all 4 episodes back to back, so it did feel more like a movie to me, and the pacing worked just fine for that. But on the negative side, Claire is barely utilized and only interacts with Leon about 3 times, 2 of which are extremely quick. And if I'm being honest, I am getting a little bit tired of the political angle of this series. I think it makes sense with bioweapons now kind of just being out there in the world, on the black market, and available for rich, power-hungry scumbags. Sure, the idea is fine, but when I see a lot of behind-the-scenes aspects of it, like spending time with politicians, scenes with the president, and all that leading into more of the political thriller angle, it takes away a bit of the things I liked about the earlier Resident Evil games and their horror elements. Stuff like being trapped in a mansion with traps, puzzles, and zombies, or a zombie outbreak in a city. I like the looming threat in the background of an evil corporation organizing and pulling the strings, but I do get tired quicker of the high-ranking officials in suits and ties talking about which countries to invade and who to align with, enforcing political agendas. I understand that's part of Resident Evil, and I'm fine with it to a degree, but going in timeline order, I've gone through 3 stories in a row now that are just like this, so I'd like to see something different or feel those horror vibes again. Having said that though, I did mostly enjoy this series, and it's certainly the best Resident Evil option to go with on Netflix. I had some gripes, but it's fun, it's enjoyable. It gives me a lot of what I want, but it doesn't quite scratch the Resident Evil itch that I have.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Resident Evil Death Island is the final and, at this point in time, most recent CG Resident Evil movie, and one that I've been looking forward to a lot since exploring the Resident Evil universe, simply for the fact that this film is the only instance in the long-running series to bring all of the main protagonists together in a massive team-up scenario. Not to mention also being the first animated film to feature Jill Valentine, and she is front and center in both all of the marketing promotion as well as the storyline of the film, so this was a huge plus for me. After playing Resident Evil 6, which really presented itself as a huge, ambitious crossover kind of game, I really felt like the only things that were missing from it were the inclusion of Jill and Claire. So getting to see them back in action here is definitely part of the appeal. However, even with the high levels of hype and excitement that I had for this Resident Evil Avengers project, the film overall kind of falls somewhere in the middle for me as far as the animated Resident Evil movies go. I certainly did enjoy it, but I also think that my expectations were a little too high. I like that the movie opens being set within the Raccoon City incident as we follow a couple of Umbrella Corp soldiers on a mission to rescue some high-ranking officials, but explicitly told to leave the civilians alone without much explanation as to why and to what's going on. We don't know it yet, but this is our introduction to who would become our main villain of the movie, Dylan Blake, who is forced to murder a friend of his who is a fellow soldier after he got infected, and ends up doing so in a particularly brutal way. His motivation now is to go after these corporations and governments that hide the truth and force soldiers like him into situations like this that leads him to having this antagonism towards our main characters that all basically, in fact, work for government organizations and go on these missions for them. It's not a bad idea for a villain, and it's a good motivation for the character to have a direct opposite reaction to the events that all of the other characters also experienced. Instead of wanting to help people and to stop bioterror like our main characters, and not wanting other people to have to go through what they did, this character, on the other hand, wants people to suffer the way he did. Also doesn't seem to recognize that a lot of our main characters actually have been going after and exposing the corrupt government officials along the way. There's also another antagonist from Vendetta that's back again with Maria, whose only purpose in this movie seems to be somebody for Leon to fight, and it's also briefly mentioned that she helped Dylan get the virus and the technology that he uses, based upon the connections that she had with Arias, the villain from Vendetta. But she was also kind of the least memorable part of Vendetta. Anyway, my favorite portion of the movie is actually probably the first act before the characters even get to Alcatraz, where the majority of the movie takes place. Mostly it's because this movie gives the most effort I've seen from any of the CG films to have a really solid continuity. Obviously, it references the last movie with Maria still being around, but it also makes specific mention of how Jill was controlled by Wesker in Resident Evil 5, and that she's still dealing with the repercussions of that, causing her to massively overcompensate and put herself into increasingly dangerous situations, not wanting to get anybody else involved. She's feeling guilt, and it's eating away at her, making her more reckless. And that's a great story point, how she's responding to that, of being violated and taken over and forced to try to kill her friends. Yes, let's deal with this. Also, there's a great moment between her and Chris where Chris brings up losing Pierce from Resident Evil 6. And wow, I mean, I know all of the CG movies are technically canon, but all the other ones really just kind of did their own story without too much or any mention of previous events. I really like how Death Island is including all of these bits of information from past games and movies to make it all feel like it matters. It's a nice touch that none of the other ones really do. The only thing that feels a little off is that Jill pretty much has the exact copy-paste of her design from the Resident Evil 3 remake, and I get that's probably because the game came out just shortly before this movie did, so they're trying to have some synergy with their releases here. But RE3 technically took place in 1998, and this movie takes place in 2015. So the fact that she looks exactly the same hairstyle, same outfit, same design, I mean, they could have changed her up a little bit. I get that it's a nitpick, but it kind of throws me off. Multiple investigations of some outbreaks lead the team to Alcatraz Island, where the victims had previously visited. We get the trio of Chris, Jill, and Claire going undercover as tourists to visit the island, and Hawaiian shirt Chris is a thing, and it's probably my favorite version of him. I wish that he wore this the entire movie, or that this was a costume option in one of the games, because I love it. In fact, when I cosplay Chris at some point in my life, this might be the version I go with. No sooner do they get to the island when people start turning into zombies, and we get some decent action scenes here in the prison. And although there are some really good action moments, and I love the team up that's happening here, I do have to say that Vendetta still holds the top spot for me as far as action and choreography goes. The bonus here is that I have Jill kicking ass, which is great to see. But none of the action scenes in this movie really stood out to me that much, and that's a bit disappointing. Jill gets separated from the group and enters the sewers, where she runs into Leon. They have a great scuffle similar to Leon and Chris in RE6 before they realize who the other is, and fuck it, this is a great moment. These characters have never interacted with each other in the games, and it literally took like 25 years in our real time for this to happen, so for novelty's sake, a segment where Jill and Leon team up, fighting a bunch of liquor kind of creatures in the sewer, and Jill having to put up with Leon's cheesy one-liners. Just give me an entire game like this. This was fantastic to see.
0.
What?
You wanted to know how many there were?
I also do have to mention that the animation here is the best that it's ever been. There's still some awkward, stiff movements, and some of the faces feel off when they're speaking from time to time, but the transition from degeneration in the mid-2000s to a 2023 production really shows how far they've come with this concept, and I honestly would love a lot more CG movies or shows with this sort of feeling and animation. I think that it's really stepped up its game. My main gripes really come from, besides the team-up factor of the movie, there's not really a lot of standout moments or ideas going on here. The prison setting is great for Resident Evil, and it's been done in some of the games like Code Veronica or Revelations 2, but most of the movie is just in one jail hallway or down in the sewers that all look the same. The action scenes aren't really up to the same level as Vendetta, and there's virtually no horror to speak of throughout the entire film. The zombies here, or the infected people, are just super fast and jumping all over the place, doing acrobatics, and it hardly makes them seem scary. Even Vendetta, that was mostly just an action movie, did have the more tension-building mansion scene in the beginning. But in this film, there's no horror anywhere, even though the setting would be perfect for it. Alcatraz is just begging to be utilized as a terrifying environment, and I don't feel like this location lived up to what it could have been. Instead, we get an extended sequence where everybody but Jill gets infected by Dylan spreading the virus through these small bug-like drones that kind of remind me of Dr. Giro's bugs from Dragon Ball. But as Chris, Claire, and Leon begin to succumb to being infected, Dylan wants to force Jill to have to kill them, just like he had to with his partner. And he goes on a long villain monologue that gets kind of tiring after a bit. Yes, it's a good form of tension, putting Jill into a situation where she may have to kill everybody, but I don't know, something about this scene just didn't work for me completely, and I felt like it went on far too long. But hey, these characters aren't the only ones that get to join the party, because we also have Rebecca Chambers coming to the rescue with a vaccine. What a gal. She's smart, resourceful, puts herself in danger to help these characters, and she's still a cutie patootie. The rest of the movie goes how you would expect it to. We got Chris, Claire, and Leon getting cured, and they all go after Dylan, who infects himself, and then merges with a giant shark bioweapon or something. I don't really know what goes on, but a huge mutated creature comes out looking really fucking cool. Basically, it's a monster that's protruding from the mouth of another monster. It's got hooved feet and a skull face. Does it make any sense? Probably not, but it's really fucking cool. Leon has this huge kung fu fight with Maria, who seems to be way more pissed at Leon than she is at Chris, even though both of them are responsible for her father's death. Maybe they just wanted to have a scene where Leon beats up a girl, showing that he doesn't play favorites and that these spin kicks are rated E for everyone. I don't really know, but hey, it's an extra fight scene. The main spectacle is, of course, all of the characters teaming up to fight the final boss. Jill, Chris, Claire, Leon, Rebecca, all cocking their weapons at once and dodging an attack from a giant creature going into an epic battle. And hey, I'll give the movie credit for this. That's never been done before. It's the Avengers Assemble moment, and it's cool as hell. It's the first and only time we get to see all of these characters at once and in the middle of a huge action scene against a giant monster, so it delivers on that. I also wonder about the characters that weren't included, that were only in like one game. Like maybe they have a team up somewhere else off screen, like maybe Carlos, Sheva, and Billy Cohen are all getting lunch together at this very same time. So yeah, the giant battle ensues. They use every classic weapon in RE history, rocket launchers, grenades, and Jill recreates killing Nemesis in RE3 using a huge plasma cannon that is here for some reason. There's not much to comment on, honestly. It's just a giant battle with all the main characters against a giant monster, with each character contributing in their own specific way. I think the best and worst thing about Death Island kind of come down to the same thing. It's a team-up movie, but without much else to offer. The horror is not as good as it could be, and neither is the action. It also pretty much follows the same beats and same formula as the last three movies, and since the movies also can't really do much in the way of progressing things beyond what the games do, you kind of end with every character just going right back to the way that they were before, but with the exception of Jill, who has a small yet existing character arc of moving through her guilt and becoming a team player once again. And I appreciated at least that much, especially for my favorite Resident Evil character. Why it took them this long to get her into one of the animated films, I don't know, but I'm happy she got to be, and she's also front and center when she finally did. So overall, Death Island is great for its novelty, but it doesn't offer a ton. And now, one new thing I think I'll add for this compilation video is I've decided to rank all of the Resident Evil animated films from what I think is worst to best. In last place, I'm going to go with Resident Evil Damnation. I thought there were some cool ideas here, but overall, this one just didn't really do it for me. The idea of the bioweapons being used in the middle of a war zone was a pretty cool concept, but everything else about the movie falls a little bit flat for me. I think it's enjoyable, there's some really good action sequences here, but overall, just not as good as the others. Next up, I'm going to put Infinite Darkness. This is the 4-episode series on Netflix, and I will say, because this is more recent, it has incredible 3D animation and action sequences where Leon is basically John Wick in the White House, and then of course the final battle with the tyrant creature towards the end. All of that stuff is fantastic, but the overall story for me just kind of falls flat. This is sort of within that middle period of the Resident Evil franchise where every story had to be about some corrupt government official doing something with bioweapons that they could obtain, and I don't know, I feel like I'm either more traditional, I like the early stories of Resident Evil where it's more about zombies and Umbrella and an evil corporation. I like the Resident Evil 4 stuff with the hive mind parasite, but then sometime in between Resident Evil 4 and 7, the games, almost every story seemed to be about some kind of corrupt government official, and it just started feeling a little bit more like an espionage political thriller rather than straight up horror Resident Evil, which is what I prefer, so this one falls a little bit further down. Above that, I'm going to put Degeneration. I actually like this one quite a bit, and it does have a lot of good zombie stuff in the beginning. I think the only thing that holds this one back is maybe it came out a little bit too early, where the CGI animation just wasn't quite up to the standards that it could reach today. Also, they do make Leon very stoic and hard-edged, and I guess I can understand the decisions why, but I'm glad they did allow him to have his personality back as it went on. Right above that, I'll put Resident Evil Death Island. This one is ridiculous, but it's just a lot of fun to see all of these characters all together and all interacting. We get to see Jill Valentine in the only animated project that she's in, and a lot of scenes with Jill and Leon together, which was really cool. We get to see Chris in the Hawaiian shirt. I don't hate the concept for the villain in this one. I think it's kind of cool. Overall, he doesn't really leave that much of a lasting impression, but it was a creative idea. And since this is one of the more recent Resident Evil projects, I think that the CGI looks really, really good here, and the action sequences are fantastic. But in the number one spot for me, I'm going to put Resident Evil Vendetta. I think this works great as just a straight up action movie that is essentially the team up of the two RE boys. You got Chris Redfield and Leon Kennedy teaming up together to go rescue Rebecca Chambers. I like the opening sequence, throws it back to the mansion horror vibes, and then of course you have Chris and Leon just running shop on all of the zombies in that one hallway sequence, and a pretty good final battle. There are things I don't like about this movie. I mean, obviously, all of these movies have flaws, but I think if I could only pick one to watch, it would definitely be Vendetta. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching this compilation video. I appreciate you guys being here. Let me know your rankings of the animated Resident Evil films down below. I do think they're worth a watch, and hey, if you made it through all the live-action films, then this might be a good palate cleanser. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Give the video a like and a comment. If you want to support the channel on a deeper level, I do have Patreon, channel memberships, and all the social media links where you can follow me down below. Other than that, guys, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time.